Good afternoon and welcome to today's webinar on preserving customer privacy with zero trust. This webinar is brought to you by Express Computer in partnership with IBM. I am Momita Deep Chaudhary, Special Correspondent with Express Computer. Well, we know that protecting personal data is essential for building brand trust. 80% of breached organizations stated that their customers' personal data or PII was compromised during the breach as per a study. In addition, regulations like the Personal Data Protection Bill currently being analyzed by a JPC could result in penalties of up to rupees 15 crore for non-compliance with personal data requirements. Given that sensitive customer data is pervasive, interspersed throughout the organization, businesses need to consider implementing privacy measures that extend data protection across the entire enterprise. Zero trust approach can help organizations protect customer privacy with access control that are based on least privilege, giving access to only those with legitimate need and for the agreed upon purpose. So before we delve deep into the session, I will read out the webinar information. Well, this webinar is being broadcasted live and will be available as on demand. This is an audio-video webinar. We will have poll questions in which we'll request all to participate in the same. We will have a round of Q&A at the end of the session. You can send in your questions using the question text box and we will address the same based on time after the presentation. If you face any technical issues, please send in your queries using the question text box. We will try to solve the same to the best of our abilities. If any of your questions are unanswered, we'll connect with you over email to answer the same. Also, a feedback form will open in your browser after the webinar ends. Please fill in the form. We'll love to hear your feedback as it's very valuable to us. Well, to know more about the topic, today we have with us Shiva Swarupa NS, Consulting and Delivery Lead, Security Services, IBM India Private Limited. Shiva leads the consulting and delivery responsibilities for security services at IBM. He brings about 28 years of experience in the industry and has extensive experience of working with customers across the globe in the cyber domain. Welcome to the virtual dais, Shiva. It's over to you.
Thank you, Momita. Good afternoon, everyone. So thanks for that wonderful introduction. Let's begin with the corporate disclaimer and moving forward. Why is this topic important today? The data privacy or customer privacy. Now, I'm sure that all of us in our day-to-day life have seen or all of us realize that today we can't do anything. Buying anything, making any payment without sharing our mobile number. So that has kind of become pretty much a mandatory aspect of anything that we do. And we have to share the mobile number almost in every place for every activity that we do. Second is, we also see that many a times we all end up sharing our email address as well. So these are two important aspects of our privacy data that we end up sharing maybe multiple times in a day with very many people whom we implicitly trust. And that is what is called as, let's say, the digital trust. While we do share these personal details with so many, service providers, vendors, and so on and so forth, I'm sure all of us also have that growing sense of awareness to evaluate as to what they're doing with my data. Because today, if somebody gets hold of our email ID, somebody gets hold of our mobile number, then it is all left to how much computing power one has to further mine and build my entire profile. And then there is no limit to what one can do. So sharing, PII data is kind of becoming the norm. And there is also a growing awareness among consumers when they share to know what is being done with the data. So that is the first aspect that makes data privacy an important aspect. Second, we are also seeing increasing regulatory activity, not just in India, but also in other countries where stricter mandates are coming into force to ensure that the PII data is not misused. And we will see aspects of how severe the penalties can be if there is evidence to prove that PII data was misused. Now, both these aspects, that is consumers, increasing awareness among consumers and increasing regulatory oversight, is essentially putting a lot of, what do I say, pressure on enterprises to safeguard PII data as far as customers are concerned. One, why is it needed? Primarily to ensure that you don't lose customers, because if customers lose trust, then you lose the customer. Secondly, to avoid all the stringent and huge amounts of fines that essentially comes with when there is evidence that PII data was misused, or it was leaked, or it was hacked, and so on and so forth. So at the enterprise level, if you see, most of that responsibility essentially is falling on the CISO, and CISOs are looking at answers to few simple questions. One is to have visibility into all the data that one has, the PII data that one has. Though it is a very simple ask and a simple requirement, making that happen has its own set of complexities, and we will look into it as we move forward. Second comes the question of how do I protect this vast amounts of data that is there within our enterprise, and how do I keep track of who is doing what with that data. The third aspect is the ability to respond instantaneously if you detect something. And again, a number of questions come up there. We will talk to that as we move forward. And then how do we ensure that we are compliant with all the mandates, that one has to adhere to. And the last aspect is, which is again a very, very important aspect, that is now increasingly being being implemented or operationalized, is user consent collection, which is we need to get the consent of the user before we do anything with the user's data. So consent management is an important aspect. So these are the four key practices that are extremely important when we today talk about privacy. Having said that, though it looks very, very straightforward, as I said, implementing that is that much more complex. And the more you implement, the more you gain the trust of the customers or consumers or end users. And that is essentially what is corroborated by the Gartner study, which says that companies that earn and maintain digital trust with customers will see increasing percentage of digital commerce activity or profits, etc. And it goes without saying, and it is fairly straightforward and evident. On the other side, you see data that once an end user or a consumer realizes that his or her data is not safe with a specific service provider or so forth, then the trust factor automatically goes down, and that in turn might end up with the enterprise losing the customer altogether. Now, with this as the context, right, as to why data privacy is important, and then what happens if these requirements are not adhered to, we now get into what does it take to make this happen, right? What does it take to ensure data privacy? So while visibility is a simple task, or a simple requirement, protecting that is also a fairly straightforward requirement. Why are enterprises not able to do that? The reason being, with adoption of cloud, right, with increasing adoption of digital ways of working, everything is distributed all across. So, most of the data used to be within the data center. Now it is all over the cloud. Applications used to be within the enterprise. It is now all over the cloud. Similarly is the case with infrastructure. So because of the increasing adoption of various, new technologies, that is essentially accelerating many of the business initiatives, security and trust are, getting degraded because of the complexity that adoption of these digital technologies is essentially bringing to the table. And if we see some data, this gives a good view into the explosion of data that we see every day in our lives, and we can also see the stringent penalties that our data protection bill is mandating for non-compliance. So that leads us to a quick poll question, which will then become a good segue into our next section.
Sure, Shiva.
Yeah.
So I'll read out the question for the benefit of our audience. And the question is, what are your key challenges when it comes to preserving data privacy? And the options are knowing where your sensitive data resides. Option 2, understanding who is accessing your sensitive data. Or the third option is managing the increase in volumes of data. I repeat the question. What are your key challenges when it comes to preserving data privacy? Knowing where your sensitive data resides, understanding who is accessing your sensitive data, or is it managing the increase in volumes of data? I request the audience to come and please participate in our poll question. Okay, so we have the results with us. 53% says understanding who is accessing your sensitive data, while 26% is of the view that knowing where your sensitive data resides is what matters, and 21% says managing the increase in volumes of data. Over to you, Shiva.
Yeah, thank you. And these the results from the poll is not at all surprising, and it boils down to the first simple ask, which is visibility. Visibility is where is my data and who is accessing the data, right? And if that question is answered, then the job of implementing controls is probably a fairly straightforward task, and monitoring also is a straightforward task. And that leads us into the next section, and this is where we see similar challenges on the slide as well. So maintaining visibility over vast amounts of data scattered across multiple silos, and that is the first challenge that is common not just in India but across the globe. And the poll results essentially substantiate what I am saying. Then the second key challenge is ensuring that there are right controls to enable safe data sharing, safe data transfer, or safe data usage. And the third one is the ability to implement privacy controls and processes with enough automation and ability to respond. So these are the three primary challenges that we see with almost every organization, and I will talk to a little more in detail on each of these. So the first one, which is visibility, and again, as substantiated by the poll, knowing what kind of personal data we have in the enterprise, and important thing is to know to whom does it belong. That is the data subject, and the third and fourth aspect is who all have access to and what are they using it for. So that is the first element of visibility that every enterprise today is trying to answer. The second one is to know what kind of data privacy risks exist within the environment, and is there a corresponding plan for remediation of that. So those are the two key questions that we will answer as we move forward. Second one is, how do we enable employees or whoever is accessing the data to ensure that they have the least privileged access to do what they're supposed to do? And then, do we have the right level of processes and standard for handling the personal data in the right way? And finally, the ability to respond to incidents and convince the consumer or the end customer with enough assurance to show or to demonstrate that we are using their data in only the way it should be used and we are not misusing the data. And that is where consent management, etc., comes in. And obviously, doing these things is the first step. ensuring that all of these are being continually updated to keep pace with changing regulations and data requirements, etc., is the ultimate challenge. And that's something that we will deal with through a maturity model. Having seen why data privacy is important, having seen what happens if we are not taking or not giving due care to data privacy requirements, and having seen the challenges associated with data privacy, we now embark on the journey to see as to how do we enable enterprises to meet these data privacy requirements. And a zero trust driven approach, we feel, is the best way to approach data privacy. And when I say zero trust, many of you might think that okay, zero trust is primarily for network, but not necessarily so. Zero trust again is a broad framework, and it gives guidelines on how to assume that you are already compromised, and how to evaluate every transaction, every activity that happens in the enterprise. So that is essentially what zero trust enables through a framework. And we advocate leveraging the zero trust approach to build a holistic privacy program that will essentially help us in addressing the three key challenges. One is knowing what is the data, where is my data, and what are the risks that as an enterprise I am carrying when it comes to managing and dealing with privacy data. Second one is, how do I enable a continuous and evaluated least privileged access model to ensure data is used only in the right way that it is supposed to be used. And finally, how do I proactively monitor, how do I proactively remediate, and how do I proactively keep my privacy program updated, upgraded to meet the newer requirements that keeps popping up on a day-to-day basis. So with zero trust as the basis or the foundation, or I would say framework for enabling privacy initiatives, we see that it essentially consists of three key pillars. The first pillar is assess, second one is protect, and third one is respond. So assess again is essentially answering the question of visibility and risk. Protect is how am I protecting the data that is in my control. And the last one is how am I responding to requests, incidents, and so forth. So we'll go a little more deeper into each of these. So when we talk of assess, it is primarily, I would say, one, to assess your privacy related risks, and then to have a well-defined privacy strategy to enable or to transform your digital transformation initiatives. Second one is to get visibility, which is discovery, classification, and mapping of sensitive data. And important thing is that classification and discovery is only the first step of the exercise. Next is to know, who does this data belong to, and then the ability to track that data. When I say track the data, I mean, how did we collect it? How are we processing it? How are we changing the data as it goes through the life cycle, etc. So that also comes into picture. And then, how do we see, all that we are trying to do now is to protect the data that you have already collected. Now, tomorrow, let's say there is a new initiative and you are launching this program. How do you ensure that you bake in all these privacy principles in design itself? So that is privacy by design and security by design. And that is similar to the closest analogy I can give is DevSecOps, etc. that we talk of. Similarly, how do we bake in these requirements right from the conceptualization of the project itself? Okay, so that is the other aspect. So all of these elements constitute the assess tower. When we talk of the protect tower, it is, as I said, it is all about implementation of controls to protect the data that I have. And it could be as simple as enforcing policies for user access, it could be protecting data with encryption, tokenization, and masking, or it could be automating access authorization to personal data. Now, this is where zero trust also plays a big role. That is depending on, let us say, who is accessing the data, from what kind of device that person is accessing that data, what time of the day that person is accessing data, what is the geolocation from that person is accessing that data. Based on all of that, you can have a dynamic authorization policy that will grant the right level of access to the user. And then obviously it flows to business partners as well. One needs to have a comprehensive view of what kind of data business partners are bringing in, accessing, and so on and so forth. So all of these controls are dynamic controls that is context driven. The important thing to note here is context driven, and that context is enabled by a number of parameters. Finally comes the respond aspect. And the first thing here is consent management. So consent management, again, is a new addition to the entire privacy program, where if I'm a consumer to to a service provider, I will have the flexibility and the ability to tell the service provider that don't use my data, don't share my data with anyone. And I can also have the option to tell them to forget my data. Let's say I decide to not to continue with the service provider anymore. I should be able to tell them to forget my data. And these preferences again should fundamentally flow into the context driven security controls that are implemented. And that is where the interconnect between your data security controls, your network security controls, and your identity controls come into picture. And that is why zero trust essentially enables all of these to be tied together in a beautiful way. So consent management is one aspect. Ability to respond to consumer requests is another important aspect. Monitoring and incident response obviously goes without saying. And then finally, ability to respond to audits and fix and ensure compliance to audit and regulatory requirements is the other one. So respond tower essentially it consists of all of these high level activities. So we now come to the second polling question, and this is where I would invite Momita to run the poll.
Thanks, Shiva. And the question for the audience is, are you considering zero trust adoption? And you need to let us know whether it's a yes or a no. Well, I repeat the question again. Are you considering zero trust adoption? The results are here. Okay. So 73% says yes and the rest no. So
awesome.
With you, Shiva. Yeah.
Awesome. Okay. So again, this is very much in line with what we are seeing globally as well. And I have a slide towards the end of the presentation that will show you a percentage, which is, I think, is in 100% alignment with what we just saw from the poll. So that's awesome. So moving forward, so we saw what are the elements that essentially constitute a good privacy program, right? Which is assess, protect, and respond. So these three pillars we saw, and each one had its own requirements. And when we try to assemble all of this into one framework based on zero trust, this is how it looks like in terms of capabilities. So in the assess tower, we see that data discovery and classification, an important aspect. That is where our question of visibility gets answered. Data inventory and minimization, data lineage, and risk insight. So when I say data lineage, that is what I was saying, that data lineage is all about, what are the sources of my data that I have, and then how is that data processed within my environment, what applications, what user, etc., and what changes are they doing to that data. It is essentially tracking the life cycle of every element of PII data that is there within the enterprise boundary. And this should be very closely linked with the consent management, which is in the respond tower. Because if the end user says or denies consent to some specific attribute of his or her PII data, then that should essentially flow into your discovery and classification activity. It should also flow into your data lineage activity, and those two in turn should dynamically configure or update your controls in the protect layer in terms of who can access the data, and what kind of processing you can do on that data and so forth. So that is how all of these three pillars are primarily linked together, and that is where zero trust comes into picture to make this interoperability easier in a context driven way between assess, protect, and respond. So when it comes to protect, fairly straightforward. I'm sure many enterprises have already implemented a fairly mature program on identity and access governance, ability to monitor activities, and some form of threat analytics. Encryption and data masking again is already widely implemented, but that might need enhancement, that might need closer integration with the other two towers from a zero trust aspect. And then finally, breach response for privacy, and then data subject rights fulfillment and consent management. So they go hand in hand, which is you collect consent, and then you implement that consent through the fulfillment program, which in turn integrates with your assess and protect tower. So this is how the overall control framework looks like. We will spend a couple of minutes on some example use cases. I won't go into a lot of detail as far as this is concerned, but I'll just give you a quick walkthrough. So if you see the bottom half of the screen, it essentially describes what I was articulating so far. So the minute a new personal data is generated, that is what you see here, one should be able to detect that data, understand its history. When I say history, whom does it belong, why did it come here, or how did it come here, and based on that, one should be able to tag it appropriately. And the minute one is able to tag it appropriately, then the policy will get kicked in, the appropriate policy for protecting that data based on the tag. And the tag will essentially give you an indication of the risk that data is bringing into the enterprise, and also the compliance requirement. So the minute you tag the data, you place the data then under appropriate policy or group for risk and compliance monitoring. You then track consent and other data subject requests. So if you see if the customer has any provided any input on what you can do and what you cannot do with the data, and that in turn will ensure that the appropriate access to data is approved dynamically for specific purposes based on the given concept. Okay. And this goes without saying that you continuously monitor the behavior and remain context aware. That is the key word, context aware, because that is what zero trust is all about. So this essentially gives a view of what to do or what should happen once a new personal data element is generated or brought into the environment. And on the top, you see some of the solutions that will help you execute the use case. Moving forward, this is another use case where we see as to how secure data usage and sharing is enabled. So somebody requests data about a specific customer, and you have the ability to locate the data. This is assuming that you have solved the visibility problem in the earlier slide. So the visibility problem is solved. There is a request for data, and you locate that data within the environment. And based on the tagging that has been done, you also identify the associated risk, the associated compliance need, and the associated consent context from the customer. Based on that, access to data is approved, or it might involve a one-step, two-step workflow process, or it is automated to an extent that based on the tag, the access is already given. And then before sharing the data, dynamically you mask, right? And you apply the relevant controls to ensure that only what is needed can be seen. And depending on the need, right, you can also ensure you don't actually show the actual data, but you show representative data, and then you monitor the usage for suspicious behavior. Okay, so this is the second use case of how one can automate the process of somebody requesting access to data that is already um, discovered, already classified, already tagged. Consent is also applied to that based on what the customer has given you, and how the end-to-end activity in this case can be automated is what this use case is all about. And finally, how do we automate and streamline the response? And here, the sample scenario that we have taken is an incident of compromise where an event is logged, a case is automatically opened. You have the right playbook to correlate, all the activity or transactions that was surrounded with this specific case, and then you review what happened and then suggest remediation based on the determined or predetermined business risk, and then you essentially have to remediate the issue. Obviously root cause, etc., will happen. Based on the outcome, you will have to go ahead and update your policies and context, right? That is the zero trust based context. And this is where tools like SOAR, etc., will come into picture. We'll be more than happy to talk further on each of these use cases, how each of these technologies can be stitched together to realize these use cases. So we now saw the use cases. Prior to the use case, we saw what are the three pillars that constitute a zero trust driven privacy initiative. Before that, we saw what are the challenges associated with privacy initiatives, and much before that, we saw why privacy is needed. So now, having understood all of that, or having seen all of that, we are now seeing how can we enable our enterprises on a journey that will take them to a optimized state of data privacy management. So essentially a 5-step maturity process where the first stage is ad hoc, which is primarily manual and reactive. Phase 2 and phase 3 is some of the tasks are automated. You have some visibility of risk, you have some visibility of compliance mandates, etc. In stage 3, processes are very well documented and defined, but obviously implementation will take a while, governance will take a while. And stage 4 is where the controls are automated, process metrics are collected. You have just started on the path to end-to-end automation. And optimized process, stage is one where you are able to realize all the 3 categories of use cases that I mentioned about in an end-to-end automated fashion. Okay, so that is essentially what the stage 5 is all about from a maturity model point of view. And what capabilities we as IBM bring to the table, this is what it looks like. So we bring multiple technology platforms, whether it is the Guardium family, whether it is the IBM Security Verify family. For identity management, Guardium is all about classification, data protection, encryption, and so on and so forth. And Respond is all about our SOAR platform and the cloud pack for security to secure the other elements of your ecosystem. Now, having said this, these are the technology platforms, and we also bring a full basket of security services that will help you in doing the right kind of classification, in implementing the right kind of controls, and also in helping you in operating all of these controls, and work with you in progressing from one stage of the maturity model to the stage 5 of the maturity model. And we have seen that a lot of customers see good results when it comes to data privacy implementation with IBM security. And these are some statistics for you to see. I'm sure IBM is not a new name for any of you, and all of you are familiar with the kind of value that we bring to the table. Having said that, how do we begin, and where do we start? So primarily from that 5-stage maturity model, what we have done is we have broken it down into 3 simple pieces, and it does not matter as to which part of the journey you are currently in, but we can always begin. If somebody is embarking on the data privacy journey now, then we can begin with the getting started phase. where we can come in, do a risk assessment and workshops, and then execute the basic data discovery classification, implement the right controls to begin with, and then also implement or institute a compliance auditing and reporting. But I'm sure most of you would have already done this. So I think the intermediate and advanced is where I see a lot of scope for us to partner with you and help you on this journey, where the maturity level is defined. That is where you begin, and this is where we will begin the practice of discovery, classification, and then linking the data to the right data subject, and consent management comes in the next stage, which is the advanced stage. Then protection is all about dynamically monitoring, policy management, and then identity and access governance with orchestration and automation from a response point of view. In the advanced stage is where we will bring in the data lineage and residency management, part of the data privacy initiative, and integrating that with your existing discovery, classification, and other controls. And finally, implementing consent management, which is more consumer focused, which in turn will become, just the way when we talk of identity management, the authoritative source for identity management today in every enterprise is your HR system, because that is where a user gets or an employee or a contractor gets onboarded or offboarded. Now, based on that trigger, many other activities happen in enterprise. Similarly, in the advanced maturity stage of data privacy, your trigger point becomes your consent management system, where the owner of the data is indicating to the controls that you have implemented as to what should be done with the data. And you should have the flexibility and the ability to manage that consent, link that consent back to the right kind of data, which has already been classified and tagged, and then automatically adjust your policies to ensure that the customer's consent is actually implemented in an automated manner. So that is how the roadmap looks like. And we'll be more than delighted to work with you, partner with you in progressing on this data privacy journey. And I'm now coming to the final stages of the presentation. A quick overview of Zero Trust. I'm sure all of you are aware of this, because a month ago, I myself had done a webinar on Zero Trust. And these are the 4 categories of use cases that essentially Zero Trust enables us to operationalize. And today we focused on customer privacy aspects. In the subsequent webinars, when it gets scheduled, we will focus on the other use cases. But yeah, I hope today's webinar gave a good view of the journey, the challenges, and the demands that are associated with implementing a good customer privacy program. And this is what I was saying, that based on the data that we have, about 78% of the organizations worldwide plan to adopt a zero trust strategy. And the poll that we had today, the percentage was about 73%. So yeah, things are very much in alignment with what we are seeing. And that is why we are running this series of webinars, because I'm sure it will help you crystallize your thoughts and also your plans and roadmaps as far as zero trust implementation is concerned. Having said that, we'll be more than happy to engage with you in a no-cost zero trust workshop, which is essentially about framing and discovery to get a view of your strategic view of zero trust, and what you are thinking, how you are thinking, what you want to achieve, and then align some of the elements of this privacy program with the overall zero trust initiatives that you are essentially planning. And we can conduct this with you. It'll be for half a day or so, and we'll be more than happy to do this for you at no cost. So that brings us to the final polling question that we have, Momita.
Thanks, Shiva. And the question is, would you like to avail this no-charge zero trust framing workshop? Yes or no? Well, I repeat the question again. Would you like to avail this no charge, zero trust framing workshop? We would want to know from you, is it a yes or a no? We really look forward to know from you. Would you like to avail this no charge, zero trust framing workshop?
Okay, so we can now move on to the Q&A section, because that essentially completes what I really wanted to share from a data privacy program perspective that was truly driven based on the zero trust framework. And I hope all of you found it useful. And if there are any questions, then I'll be more than happy to take.
Sure, Shiva. So we'll go into the Q&A session now. The question is, zero trust is not a new concept. What do you think? Why do you think it's gaining so much of popularity even after 10 to 12 years after it has come into existence?
Yes, zero trust is not a new concept. Yes, I agree. Zero trust has been there for a while now, and zero trust is a broad framework, and each vendor, each analyst has given their own flavor to the framework. Operationalizing zero trust essentially requires a lot of work on the network side, on the identity side, on the data side, even on your workloads, server workloads, etc. And it's only now, based on the increasing adoption of digital transformation initiatives, that zero trust has also gained a lot of traction. With cloud, what has really prompted or accelerated zero trust adoption? Essentially two things. One is cloud, because once workloads moved to the cloud, firewalls started disappearing. The only way to control access was at the edge of the cloud, and that is where zero trust finally started getting adopted. Once the adoption started there, then we are seeing a lot of people in the industry exploring as to how to implement the zero trust aspects to my identities, to my data, to my workloads, etc. And now it is flowing from the edge backwards to identities, to data. And that is where this webinar was also positioned in such a way that how do you apply zero trust principles to data security? Okay, so that is one of the reasons why we are seeing a lot of traction, and this traction is essentially going to increase in the coming days as well.
Great one, Shiva. Well, we have another audience question. It says, what is a good first step to get started with zero trust?
Yeah, so as I said, zero trust is a massive, I would say, initiative in my opinion. So the first step is to essentially assess what is it that one needs to do, to begin with. Obviously, you cannot tackle everything in one shot. So, and what we are seeing is zero trust network access is fairly easy to implement, and that is what many customers have already adopted, the zero trust based network access. Now we are seeing zero trust driven access management. Now that probably could be the next logical step after one implements zero trust based network access. Then how do you adopt zero trust for identity and access is a good next step in my opinion. Data can happen parallelly with identity. And finally, one should look at implementing multiple types of segmentation that comes on the workload side. That could be the next step, because the ultimate goal again here is to ensure, the fundamental principle of zero trust is assume breach. That is, you assume that you're already hacked and you try to see how you can still protect, how you can still evaluate every access request that comes in and so forth. And when you say, or when you assume that you have been hacked, the first step that you have to do is to ensure that hacker is not able to move from one network to another network, one workload to another workload, and so forth. So that is where this concept of segmentation comes into picture, whether it is at the workload level, network level, or whatever it is. So that could be the next step. So it all depends on where you are in your journey, and then we can do a quick assessment to lay out a good practical roadmap to implement different aspects of the zero trust framework.
Well, thank you, Shiva, for the response. I urge the audience to come in with more questions, queries that they have. Well, Shiva, we have a question from Priyanka here. She wants to know how long and what key things to implement zero trust and defense in depth network security for hybrid cloud models that use on-prem and virtual public clouds across non uh, redundant geographical locations without impacting access privileges that may affect conflict of interest.
Yeah, this is a fairly multiple questions. Now, how long it depends. I don't think I'll be able to give a time frame on how long it would take. But to implement zero trust at the network security level, right now today we have multiple solutions available that combine a lot of things into one platform, right? Whether it is Zscaler or Color Tokens or Cisco or whoever it is, all of them combine multiple functionality into one service. Again, that is modularized. One can pick and choose what you want to go with, etc. And again, that is also geography independent. Like whatever little I know of Zscaler and so forth, it doesn't matter from which geography one is coming in, etc. But you bake in the right kind of policies, and then with they also have associated components that will enable one to access on-prem applications or applications that are resident in virtual public clouds or public clouds across multiple geolocations, etc. Now, without impacting access privileges that may affect conflict of interest. Now, obviously, the controls that gets implemented. See, zero trust again is all about moving your firewall, your IDS, IPS, your proxy, all the functionality from your network perimeter to the cloud edge, that is edge of the cloud, from where any enterprise user can come in. And as and when that person comes in, you essentially intercept that request, and then you have to evaluate that request. So that request essentially comes back to your authoritative source, which is your identity repository. It could be AD, it could be something else. But access privileges obviously is defined or based on what you have defined in your identity repository. Now, you have mentioned conflict of interest. Now, I presume that is where you need to implement a good SOD policy or segregation of duty policy. Now, that in turn will have to get evaluated before you grant or reject access. So I presume that is what it is. And a simple straight, obviously it's a complicated question. We can have a discussion, one-on-one discussion on this to really understand a little more before I can give a prescriptive solution. So hope it answers your question in to some extent. The other question that I see is from Mr. Vinod. We are already taking care of data privacy as per CIA and as per imposed by different regulatory bodies, including user consent, KYC. So how the zero trust is different from that? Now, obviously, if you're already taking care, I'm sure you've already implemented some or many parts of zero trust. And zero trust framework can be applied to what you've already implemented to see the maturity level that exists. Because since you've already implemented and you're already operational, I'm sure you're doing many things right. And we can evaluate what is already operational from a zero trust lens to see if anything can be further improved or further enhanced, so that we can bring in the dynamic nature of the zero trust program and the context driven aspects of the zero trust program. So that is all I can say on this.
And Shiva, well, we have one more question. How do I make data access limited and conditional?
How do I make data access limited and conditional? Yeah, see, that is what the entire webinar was essentially focused on. Now, conditional, two things you said, conditional and limited. So conditional is based on the classification that you have done, right, and the tagging that you have applied to the data. So based on the tag that you have given, you have applied to the data, the access is conditional to that. Now, in terms of who can access the data, now you can impose further conditions on that condition by saying what transactions can be done on that data, who can access, what transaction can be applied, when can somebody access the data, and what can somebody do with the data. So those are all conditional access that you are applying to the data only based on the classification and the tag essentially that you are given to the data. So unless you classify and unless you tag it, conditional access is, becomes a little difficult to apply. So I think that is the first step to do, to give conditional access to data. Obviously, it also relates back to identity, how well you have classified your users, how well you have categorized your users, how well you have applied segregation of duty policies and modeled it. So all of those aspects essentially play a big role when it comes to conditional access for data.
Here's another question. How does selective risk-based database encryption and masking impact performance of zero trust framework solution? And are there any challenges seen in this for mission-critical time-sensitive system access?
Yeah, so risk-based encryption and masking, again, they are part of the zero trust framework itself, right? When I say three things we saw: assess, protect, and respond. So encryption and masking are part of the protect function that I was talking about, and they are part and parcel of the zero trust framework or the solutions. Different products might be there and the technologies might be there, so that will depend on the relationships, the performance of the technology, and so forth. So the first part of the question is, how does selective risk-based encryption masking impact performance? So they're part of the framework of zero trust, and they should not impact performance of zero trust framework. But there is a question there, obviously, to what level of encryption we can go, right? And to what level of masking can be implemented? What is the lag? What is the delay that it introduces to the actual processing of the transaction or execution of the business related activity that is happening? Now, I don't have an offhand answer to that. It again depends on the power that is available, the kind of transaction that is there, how intensive is the transaction, and so forth. But yes, that these controls are part of the standard framework. Applying these controls, yes, there could be some impact on performance, but that is what should be evaluated on a case-to-case basis, scenario-to-scenario basis, and factor the right fit technology so that that performance impact can be minimized. Obviously, security is a what do I say? Is a big balance between convenience and protection, right? So more convenience, more speed means that there will be some impact on end users. There could be some impact on performance, but this needs to be evaluated on a case-to-case basis.
Sure. Thank you so much for this, Shiva. And with this, we come to the end of the Q&A session. Would come to you for your closing remarks.
Yeah, thanks everyone for for making time to join this webinar. And I hope, or I truly believe that we have shared some important aspects of the data privacy program, why it is important, and through the different polling questions that we executed, we also see that whatever our customers are thinking is exactly in line with what we are seeing at the global level. And we really look forward to partnering with you and engaging with you in helping you progress on this journey of data privacy, which I'm sure all of you have already begun and are in various stages of maturity. So yeah, truly look forward to partnering with each one of you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Shiva Sarup, for sharing your insights. We are definitely richer today by the knowledge you have shared with us. And with this, we have come to the end of the webinar. Thank you, audience, for sparing your valuable time for being with us today. In case you have any queries, please reach out to the IBM team. Take care and stay safe. Thank you all once again.
Thank you.